here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. Pat and Scott here at the 9 Route to help give you the deep dive you need, going deep to win your fantasy football league on a week-to-week and season basis. We like to get these out of the way for the preseason as far as our rankings. Now we're going to get into something that we definitely, before we get too far into it, we definitely like to talk about a strategy, whether you have a plan or you don't, or you're trying to figure out what works or what might be the best for you. Obviously, there's a lot of information out there right now, tons of different things. We're going to give you our ideas and ways that we have attacked drafts, whether it be a regular redraft with no kind of keeper concepts or anything like that, or if you're in a keeper league or the dynasty leagues that are all the rage and everything like that, where you may have multiple picks that can be traded during a draft, or you're just going right down the line and just picking best guys available and stuff like that. So we're going to talk about what works for us and may work for you. Some of it may sound familiar. Some of it may be a light in the darkness, so to speak. What do you think, Pat? You think these folks are ready for our strategies? Hopefully we can get them a win.
I hope so. I mean, I think that, this is just my personal opinion, but I feel like going into any game or sport or competition or anything like that, I think one of the biggest factors on how well you're going to do is what kind of strategy you have going in. Now, you've heard people say things like you win your league at the draft, or you don't win your league at the draft, or whatever the case is. And I think that depending on the type of fantasy manager that you are, both of those things can be true. I think that you are one of the people who probably doesn't win your league at the draft. You tend to be a lot more active in the trade market and very active with picking up players, throughout the season and things like that. I tend to not trade as much. I try to gather as many good players as I can, early in the season, and then I'll trade if something comes along, or if I feel like I'm weak in a certain area. But I don't think either of those strategies is necessarily wrong. I just think that you have to have a strategy going in. You have to have some sort of basis for the decisions that you're going to make moving forward in your fantasy league. So you and I are going to sort of lay out our own individual draft strategies and give a few tips. And like I said, they're generally pretty different.
Yeah, I'd say some of it's polar opposite, and then some of it is very very similar.
So when I go into a draft, most of the leagues that I'm in, I've been in for a while. Every once in a while, usually once a season, just to kind of keep things fresh, I will jump into like a brand new league. Sometimes with people I know, sometimes with people I don't know. Just depends, but just to sort of get in there and just do a normal draft. A lot of the long time leagues that I'm in are either keeper leagues or they're redraft, but you're with the same guys. From year to year, your draft position may change, but you generally know your draft position prior to getting to the draft. So in most of the leagues that I'm in, I kind of have an idea when I go into the draft who's already going to be kept. If it's a keeper league, who's going to be drafting in which positions, where my draft picks are, so that gives you a basis. If you're in a league like that where, it's the same people over and over again, I think a lot of fantasy leagues are, take advantage of all the information that you have at your disposal to make an informed decision on your draft strategy. So for example, if you're in, just as you're in one league, or there's one league that you really care about, and you know that you are going to be drafting from whatever, let's say the 4 position, go into your draft knowing what a good draft in your mind looks like from the 4 position. Who are you looking to get with that first round pick? Once you get that player, how does your team go from there? So it's about specific builds. And my first tip or strategy is decide what type of team you're looking to draft. generally you're going to find in the first round that you can pretty much get the foundation for any type of team that you're going to want to build. And what I mean by, what type of team is decide, are you going to go for running backs early? Are you going to, maybe try a 0 RB strategy and not draft any running backs until, the 5th or 6th round or whatever? Maybe you want to do, and one of the strategies that I did last year that I really liked was what they called a hero RB. Basically what that means is just taking one really good running back early and then sort of transitioning to a sort of, not necessarily a 0 RB, but one running back, and then fill up your other positions, wide receivers, maybe even grab your quarterback and your tight end, and then mix in some more running backs further on down the road. And when you do this, when you're trying to decide on the strategy that you want to use, one of the things that I do is I go through and look at I do a lot of mock drafts, and then I look at the players that I notice that I'm reaching for. So if I see a guy who, maybe is 5 or 6 players down the list when it's my turn to draft, but I'm still reaching for that guy anyway, that's how I know that that's sort of a guy that I'm, a little bit higher on. And that's actually how I create a lot of my rankings is just my personal preference on the guys that I'm drafting. Once you decide what you're going to do within that first round or 2 rounds, because those are pretty, again, if you're just doing a standard redraft with no keepers or anything like that, you can pretty much get an idea based off of your draft position who's going to be available at those first 2 or 3 picks, and which route you want to go there. Once you decide on that strategy and you have those players that that you want, that you seem to be grabbing in each draft, just keep mock drafting with those players as your foundation. So let's say, for example, I am at the number 2 spot. I know that if I'm number 2 and Christian McCaffrey is on the board, I'm going to take him. He's my number 1 ranked running back. He's my number 1 ranked player overall. So if he's available there at 2, which he tends to be a lot because Jonathan Taylor seems to be going as the consensus 101, I take McCaffrey, and then I have played with that 2nd and 3rd round pick to see which type of build I like better, and whether I go with another running back in the 2nd or 3rd round, or whether I go, wide receiver, or in some cases even tight end wide receiver. I do that over and over and over again. And then once I have enough of those mock drafts sort of concluded from the position that I'm drafting in, that's when I go back and look at those teams and I start to determine which team do I like better. And when I start to figure out which team I'm happier with, then I start to look at, okay, for these teams, when I was doing these mock drafts, which spots are my quarterbacks and my tight ends falling into that I like the most. So if I happen to like a team, let's say, again, we'll take that number 2 spot again, for example. So let's say I draft Christian McCaffrey in the 2 spot, in the number 2 overall. I come back, I have, obviously the second to last pick, the 2-11 coming back. Let's say I go tight end there. Mark Andrews is available. He's my second tight end. I do believe that he's worth a pick in the 2nd round. So let's say I select him there, and then I grab a wide receiver, let's say AJ Brown in 3rd. If that's the team that I tend to like, then what I will try to do is I will try to base my strategy for my actual draft off of that draft. Now, obviously, you're taking a tight end early. If you've been listening to our show for last season, I said that one of the things that I never do, and I don't think it's a good strategy to bring into a draft, is I never draft a quarterback and a tight end early. So if on those teams I like the team that I got Mark Andrews and I picked my tight end early, I'm generally going to like the quarterback that I'm getting later, and vice versa. Let's say, again, same thing comes around, I draft Christian McCaffrey. Maybe I take Josh Allen at the end of round 2, and then again say AJ Brown. So just trading out Allen for Mark Andrews. If that's the case, then I know that I'm generally going to select my tight end later. So basically, like the fourth tip in this, first was decide which type of team you want to have. Second was choose your must-have players. Third was mock draft as many times as you can from that position. The fourth tip is decide where you're happy taking your quarterback and your tight end, because you really shouldn't take a quarterback and a tight end early. I'm not saying that that's completely out of the question, that it's a strategy that you should never use, because value tends to pop up all over the place in drafts. But if it's a standard normal draft that guys tend to be coming off the board at or around their ADP of where you kind of think they're going to go, you have to decide which one you want to take early and which one you would rather have late. That is completely up to you which way you want to go with that, but you should be able to make that determination based off of these mock drafts and seeing which teams you like better, based off of, like, again, whether you went tight end early and QB late or vice versa. Also, whether you took a lot of running backs early or took a lot of wide receivers early, or maybe you're the type of person who, especially when you're at that turn there with the 1-2 pick or the 11-12 pick, maybe you like to try to take one running back and one receiver and try to keep your roster balanced out a little bit more. That's fine as well. If that's the route that you want to go, if that's what makes you comfortable, then do that. But once you have all of that in place, and now you know where you're willing and want to take your quarterbacks and tight ends, the final tip number 5, is have a backup plan when your plan starts to fall apart, because you're going to get into your real draft, and inevitably something is going to happen. Like, you wanted to take Mark Andrews at the 2-11, and now he's not available. Well, what do you do now? Do you reach for another tight end? Do you maybe take Kittle or Pitts or whoever you have as your tight end 3? Or do you now transition from that strategy that you've had and take, another running back or wide receiver, or maybe you do decide to take Josh Allen? But by mock drafting all of these different scenarios and situations, you have a better idea of what your team is going to look like if you do take a certain player above another player. And then now you have, an idea of, let's take the 0 RB strategy. Let's say you start wide receiver in the first 3 rounds and you don't have a running back yet. If you have a running back that falls to you that you see as a much better value than, where you're currently picking, maybe, the other people in your league just are really low on a player or whatever, you can adjust midstream. So have a backup plan. You don't have to necessarily draft the exact team that you mock drafted, but you have to have an idea of, okay, these are the core guys that I want. These are the rounds that I'm going to have to take them in. And so for example, like Mark Andrews in the second, I don't think that's a terrible pick. I think you would be just as good with George Kittle there, Kyle Pitts in that spot. So I don't think you have to veer from your strategy if that doesn't work out for you. However, if your strategy was to, let's say, pass on tight end and quarterback until a little bit later because you see some values further down the board, that doesn't mean that you can't still grab one of those guys if somebody starts to fall, and it's going to overall make your team better by doing it that way. So again, have a plan going in, mock draft, make sure that you kind of have an idea of the team that you're going to be looking at. Like, I know for me, a couple of the guys that I tend to be grabbing in these drafts a little bit early are Michael Pittman from the Indianapolis Colts. I think that he's criminally underrated by the public in ADP. I think he could potentially be a top 5 wide receiver this year. Courtland Sutton, now that Russell Wilson is in Denver, I think that he has an opportunity to finish well above his, projections in his ADP. And Dalton Schultz going in like the 6th or 7th round sometimes on that Cowboys offense. We haven't talked about tight ends yet, but he's going to be one of the guys that I get to. But he's a guy that I grab almost every mock draft, because I just feel like, him being the sixth tight end off the board and me having him as the third tight end as far as, where I think he's going to finish, he screams value to me. So that's a guy who, when I'm doing these mock drafts and I've sort of lined up my strategy, Schultz is a guy that I'm willing to reach for in the sixth, because I feel like he's still a much better value, even at the 601 than, let's say George Kittle is at the, 308 or something like that, where he happens to be going in draft. So once you have a strategy and once you have an idea of where, you have the guys that you like and you can get those guys in those certain rounds, you're going to see that there's going to be like a dead zone for you where you're like, I don't really like any of the running backs or wide receivers in this range. That's when you go out and you grab a quarterback or a tight end in those areas where you're not really feeling, the other position players. As we all know, wide receiver and running back are the most important parts of your fantasy football team. They're pretty much going to make or break your season for the most part. So making sure that you're grabbing those guys that you really believe in and you think are going to finish high and score you a lot of points is obviously the route you want to go. You quarterback and tight end, you kind of have to mix in there and find what I think is fine value in those two positions specifically. Now Scott's going to pop in here and tell you about his draft strategy, which is a little bit different than mine, but also just as effective. And I think he's got a couple of championships in our league of record to prove that the effectiveness there. So,
or ineffectiveness, it depends. No, and again, just to touch on what you're saying, Pat. Again, like you and I differ on certain things, but at the same time, I think that you definitely have to figure something out walking in the door, or like you said, one of the biggest things is knowing the rules, like knowing the scoring system, knowing where you're drafting from position wise. And again, there's so many different types. Again, a basic redraft is just kind of cut and paste, so to speak. Like you kind of know where you're at with everything versus, a dynasty concept and something like that, where things can happen during the draft that back in the day when we first kind of got going, that was really kind of unheard of, but now it's a little more commonplace. And that's kind of where I'm at with my stuff. But I would say, first of all, are you mocking me? Yes, I think mock drafts do give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on. And again, you can do one right after the draft, the NFL draft. You just got to keep up with them if you're following that as a game plan. Me personally, I'll take a look at them. I'll mess around with them a little bit, but it's tricky if it doesn't allow for certain rule settings based on your league settings for scoring and different things like that, or bonuses and all that. And by the time you get through some of that stuff, it's kind of crazy, but it gives you a basic blueprint for, who's the top 25, 50 guys that are going to come off the board based on positions and different things like that. So they can be effective. I don't do them all the time, but I do, from time to time, take a look. I'm not a big, I am not down with ADP. And that just gets to my overall. I tend to enjoy a nice beverage when I draft, especially, in our league of record. But at the same time, I think there's an old saying that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Basically, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's exactly why I feel that to be water during your draft. You can drink it as well if you choose to. I prefer different liquids, but
only. Sorry.
But when it comes to that, I think you have to be very fluid when it comes to it. Like you may have a plan in place, and that's great. And then for some people that maybe are a little OCD and stuff like that, it's just going to bug you out, and you might get a little pissed and lose yourself and mad that somebody took the player that you wanted and all this stuff. Just kind of go with the flow. Be willing to do the concepts that will get you the players that you want. And I think that getting your guys is probably the most important part. I will reach like Mr. Fantastic to get a guy rounds earlier, and people will look at me like I got three heads because, well, on my list here, he was listed as the seventh best tight end, and I don't understand why. It's the guy I want. leave me alone. I will follow certain things when it comes to rules and stuff like that. Who's the better player? Sure. If you have a guy who's a second round talent and for some reason is falling and it's not because of injury, it's because people are low on him. Sure. There are some values to be had when people slide down the board. I like being the guy that starts to run on people. Like, yeah, I'll take the quarterback because then suddenly people go, oh crap. Again, this was based on like redrafts and stuff. Nowadays, Superflex dynasties, it's all out the window because your quarterbacks are your first ones to go. Then the running backs are very close behind, and then the wide receivers and so on and so forth. But I feel like the plan in a sense is if you label guys that you are looking to get throughout, like Pat, you just talked about, like Michael Pittman, for instance. I'm very high on him. If I could get him, great. I'm not going to super reach on him, but I would definitely try to take him maybe over a few other wide receivers, even some of the top ones from last year based on, regression and stuff like that when it comes to touchdowns and yardage and stuff like that. To me, that's the big thing, though, getting the guys that you want to have on your team. The one league that I'm in is set up very much like the NFL. It's a 32-team league with IDP and on that level. It's crazy. I'm kind of trying to get used to that flow, and they have a single quarterback, a running back, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and 2 flex positions. So it's very basic, but it's also really something that kind of makes you think. And there's not a lot of players that are around at this point. So, you're really trying to figure out what's going on. That was a team I picked up, but it was at the same time just showing you that there's a lot of, hey, just kind of have to go with the flow sometimes of your draft and deal with it. But at the same time, get your guys. That may involve, renting a U-Haul. You might have to make some moves during the draft. Our league of record is usually pretty cut and dry. Sometimes there's a deal cut maybe just before the draft starts or right in the middle of the first round and stuff like that, because we normally just allow for like a year's worth of picks to be traded from the following season as long as people are paid up. I know that's always a big thing regardless for everybody. When it comes to a dynasty league where you're talking about 2 or 3 years ahead with picks, again, probably expecting you to be paid, but there's a lot more moving parts there. Whether you're on like Sleeper or some of the other apps that are out there right now, being able to get that far ahead and use those bargaining chips, which, during a startup, it's probably not going to get you a lot unless you have somebody. I did go full tank in one draft right from the jump because I just want to see what it's like. Normally in our league of record, I'm also not used to drafting a lot early. Like this year, I don't have a pick until the 9th round. And that's because last year I was close to a playoff push. I had Christian McCaffrey. I went out and traded my first 8 rounds of picks for Dalvin Cook. Missed the playoffs by just a hair. And actually, if I had made the playoffs, I think I would have had one of the best teams, if not the best team with points. But I pushed all in. That's something mid-season. Now, I don't have those picks coming up this year, so I'm going to have to scrounge and figure out what to do. I get 2 keepers minimum. That's, again, our rules, our league, and how it goes. But during the draft, yeah, sometimes you might want to trade back if you're looking at the board and you see what's going on. Again, you're being fluid. You want a guy who he's probably going to be there in the next round. Hey, you know what? Let me see if somebody's interested in my pick, and I'm going to back up into that round and double up with some volume for a higher pick. It's not if it's not something that's going to handicap your team by doing it. Sure. Are you going to trade the 1.1? No, you're not going to do that. I mean, somebody, brings the farm to you. Somebody like I've been known to do that for one player, but it's just being willing to do that. And I think it's hard sometimes if you're going in too rigid. I know, Pat, you did say, be flexible, but have a plan. But some people go in too rigid and they have that, they're following the ADP and they're taking the best and they have this plan. And to me, that's just not me. I'm willing to make those moves. At the end of the day, when you're finished your draft, you want to like your team. I mean, you want to step back and look at that draft board and, kind of start nodding to yourself like, yeah, I like what I put together. I even just said before we get started, I was in a draft a couple of years back, and I did that. I went down the line and kind of just took the best guy up, the best player available, and wanted to see how that would affect me. And my team was okay. They weren't anything special. It wasn't injuries. They were just okay. I think I drafted from 12-team league. I think I drafted from like the 8 or 9 slot. I didn't like my team. I kind of hated my team and made trades and tried to get some of the players that I liked and so on and so forth. So that was one where it just kind of left such a bad taste in my mouth that after that, I just said, no, you know what? I'm not going to ever do that again. I mean, again, if somebody drops to you as a monster value that should have been taken rounds ago, different story. Sometimes it's, just keeping it away from other people so that they don't pile up. Pay attention to what's going on. If there are runs on a position, I think that's very important. Whether it be tiers of running backs that are going, Pat, you just said it, that running backs pound for pound. And I used to think, but I've done some research, and I'm going to try to get an article together for the website to just see the impact that the running backs truly do have. And I know we talk about it from PPR settings and the dreaded committee concepts and all that, but to really see what those top 2 or 5 running backs do for a league points wise, sometimes the gap between 1 and 2 is damn near 100 points. And that's ridiculous when you think about it, going back to like the monster McCaffrey season and stuff like that. So you do have to pay attention to what's going on, but just again, be water, go with the flow, get your guys, be willing to make moves to get your guys. And at the end of the day, you want to like your team. You know what I mean? You maybe didn't pick your spouse out of a hat or your significant other. You measured certain things out, but you knew at the end of the day, you know what? I think I'll keep her or keep him. Same thing. You want to really like that at the end of the day. You want to look at that draft board. You want to get to that website, start to get your starters ready, look at your week 1 matchups, and you want to go, yep, I like my team. A lot of times I see people, as soon as they're done drafting, boom, they're out to trade because they don't want this, they want that. And again, that's part of it too. Go with the flow through the season. But I think at the end of the day, you want to like your team, because then if you don't, you're going to be a little bit at a disadvantage, because you're going to then trade away maybe future picks or get beat up in a 2-for-1 deal to get one guy you want. And then you maybe turn out and you kind of weaken your team a little bit. Again, a couple guys that I've been high on through the season. Jelani Woods, I heard, struggling a little bit in camp. We'll see what happens. It's his first year, obviously, and it's a little bit sometimes difficult for tight ends to get a little bit acclimated because they have a lot going on when it comes to blocking, as well as being involved in the passing game. Kyle Phillips, I heard, was getting first-team slot reps with the Tennessee Titans. Kind of like him, he looks a little Cooper Kupp-ish, albeit younger. And Romeo Doubs, who I started picking up on pretty quick, reading the Packers wide receivers, and he was a guy that, was a solid player at Nevada, and actually was, if you look on paper, outperformed in a sense Christian Watson for North Dakota State, albeit he was the more freakish athlete. But I like the pedigree of Doubs, and it looks like he's doing okay with Aaron Rodgers, who's giving him high marks in camp, albeit it's camp. But if the top quarterback in the league is a big fan of you, the back-to-back MVP and all that stuff. So if he's a fan, I think that's a name that you might want to pay attention to come your draft. Again, some of these guys you might be able to steal a little bit down the road.
Yeah, I think that speaking of the Packers and their situation, I think that that's one of these things that we talked about in the offseason about the loss of Davante Adams and how they make that up. And I think the Packers are going to I think they're going to spread the ball around a little bit more. I don't think you're going to see, the 30% target share that Adams got going to any one player. Rodgers was talking. I don't know if you saw the quote where he said they said something about, somebody asked how difficult it was going to be this year without Davante Adams, and he said, "Yeah, well, it's tough when you go from one Hall of Famer to another," and the tongue-in-cheek, thing was that was about Alan Lazard and how Rodgers, I don't want to say plans on, but I guess at least put out there that he believes that Lazard can be an all-pro wide receiver. So there's definitely a lot of buzz around Packers camp with the wide receivers, and people sort of wondering where the production is going to come from that is missing with Davante Adams in Las Vegas. But I think Doubs is definitely one of those guys who can step up and take a nice chunk of that vacated targets for himself. So
yeah, you got Sammy Watkins will probably be good for about 7 games. Randall Cobb obviously goes way back with Aaron Rodgers, but yeah, Lazard, I know he is high on that. That was definitely talked about that. Yeah, he'd probably be the next guy up. He liked, his size and obviously his ability in the offense. And yeah, Rodgers is going to throw it to whoever's going to catch it. And yeah, if you're on that roster, I think you have a good shot. Just hold on to the football, man.
So hopefully today we helped you guys with your draft strategy, kind of give you some pointers about, what to look for going into your draft, what to look for coming out of your draft, as Scott said, with the wanting to like your team. It's funny you say that, and in one of the leagues that I'm in, we draft, a live draft, and every year when the draft is over, me and my buddy Steve, Steve, he's also in our league of record. Steve is always like, man, I really like my team. And he says that he's been saying that for years. And it seems like every year that he says he likes his team, he like really struggles. And the 1 year that he didn't, he came out of the draft, he's like, oh man, I'm going to have to make some trades. This team doesn't look all that good. I think he ended up finishing second that season. So maybe liking your team isn't a prerequisite for winning. It might be a prerequisite for having fun, but I mean, maybe it just depends on your ability to determine what a good team is and what a good team isn't. So no offense to Steve, but yeah, I did like his team most of the time. He liked it as well. So, but you never know. I mean, again, it's a long season, injuries, guys underperforming, guys overperforming, different situations and different schemes, and the way certain coaches use certain players. Like everything is always. We do this podcast because we love fantasy football, and it's nice to talk about it. And I do the research anyway, so why not share it? But until the season starts, you really have no idea what a lot of these guys are going to do, and the positions that they're going to be put in. So all we can do is speculate here. But I do agree with. You want to make sure that you come away with at least a few of the guys that, are your guys that you believe in, guys that you like, even if if you're a fan of a certain team and you want to make sure you grab a guy from your team so that you can root for that player, more power to you. I mean, I tend to want to take values in drafts, and I'm not going to specifically reach for a guy who plays for the Eagles just because he does. But if I do see a value like Jalen Hurts, I still think, going right around the 6th, 7th round, I think he's going to be probably a top 3 or 4 quarterback this year. I think, getting him in the 6th or 7th is a value. So I will absolutely take him in that range if that's where he, happens to fall to me. But I'm not going to reach for him and grab him in the 4th just because he plays for, the team that I root for. So, but again, when it comes to liking your team, it's about picking guys that you believe in, guys that you think are going to, help win you a fantasy championship in the end. So hopefully we were able to do that for our listeners today.
Yeah, I hope so. We did help your buddy from work last year win his league. So, try to make that 2 in a row, hopefully for him as well.
That'd be great.
At the end of the day, again, you could go with the flow. You can go in with a plan, but, bend and not break and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's, you're trying to win, maybe win some money. You're trying to have fun. It's a lot of trash talking and bragging rights for an entire year. And some people, really enjoy that part of it. And, again, I think, Pat will probably agree. We do online drafts and stuff like that, but like, your first league, your home league, where you get the buddies together and you kind of sit around and maybe have like a little, whether it's a party concept or anything like that, it's a lot of fun. And that to me has always been the biggest thing. It's getting everybody together and doing that stuff. So go draft, go mock draft, have fun. And, just best of luck to you out there, no matter what. And if you're not happy with your team, give me a call. I'll make a trade.
I'm sure you will. So before we go, just want to run through our where you can find us again. Scott and I are both on Twitter. We are at the 9 Route 1 and at Scott from Delco. Again, just real quick with the promotional reminder, we do have that Darius Slay jersey that we're giving away. All you need to do for that is follow the show, take a screenshot, review the show on whichever platform you're listening. Send us a screenshot of that as well with your name and your home address so that if you win, we can ship you the jersey. But please make sure that you get on board with that. We have until the end of the preseason to get those entries in. And again, I want to thank Mickey's Port of Call Pub in Tuckerton, New Jersey. If you're looking for a place to do your draft, Mickey's has a beautiful outside dining area where you can draft your team. Also have a whole separate section inside where they can kind of section off for you and put your board up and do all that good stuff. I know the owner there, Mike, real big into fantasy football. I've sat and talked fantasy with him. He's definitely he's one of the guys. He's probably, if you have your fantasy football draft there, he's probably going to want to hang out and drink with you. So, but that's the type of guy that he is. So,
well, I know where we're going for our draft.
But yeah, so check that out. Mickey's portofcallpub.com. This is our website. If you want to go on and request a time and date to do your draft there, please do. Tell them that the guys at the 9 Route sent you. That would definitely go a long way with Mike there, with the owner, and go a long way with us too. We appreciate it. So anything else we got, Scott, before we
No, it sounds like a plan, guys. Head over to Mickey's, have a good time, and local watering hole, definitely maybe a good spot to do the draft. But again, hopefully we help this week, and we'll be getting back into our rankings soon. Running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, might even do a kicker. No, I'm just kidding. No kickers.
We don't have that kind of time.
No. Basically, just take Justin Tucker. That's all you got to do. But folks, we appreciate your time. We love everybody out there. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon here at the 9 Route. Peace.